H.P. Lovecraft is inarguably the biggest name in the world of existential horror, and he's spawned all kinds of imaginative horrors, from cosmic monsters to scary creatures that terrorize and inspire horror fans even today. Among them, Cthulhu is inarguably one of the most fascinating Eldritch horror monsters out there, and this mysterious being has gone on to inspire innumerable horror tales, ranging from a creature smashed apart by a ship to a self-regenerating monster to someone with the ability to invade your dreams, all while maintaining a non-physical form. While all these descriptions sound strange to begin with, the traditional Cthulhu is the furthest from its simple, most popular depiction as an octopus-headed monster, and Lovecraft originally described him as a being whose anatomy violates all laws of flesh, solidity, injury, and death. Bearing this in mind, it's safe to categorize him as an extraterrestrial entity whose features extend beyond the scope of human physiology and might not even exist within a conventional body. So, without further ado, let's travel back in time to when Lovecraft first introduced us to this mythical entity and explore its eldritch anatomy in all its glory. What is Cthulhu's body actually made of? Well, a big reason behind the popularity of Lovecraftian horror is the mystery that comes with it. Fans have always tried to speculate and come up with their own theories regarding Cthulhu's anatomy. Lovecraft definitely steered away from presenting this mythical creature as flesh and blood, instead using words such as plasticity, gelatinous material, and stickiness. Also, in the lore, Cthulhu is one of the great old ones, godlike entities whose forms don't obey the anatomical rules that apply to mere mortals. Keeping all of this in mind, Cthulhu is best described as an exotic extraterrestrial entity, and any claims that it has conventional muscle, bones, or tissue are purely speculative. Moreover, there's been no descriptions of its cells, alien DNA, or molecular structures, even if inspired literature, such as Go Tanabe's 2024 Dark Horse comic adaptation, has given him a physical form. Here, Cthulhu appeared in the form of a tentacled monster with garbled, overlapping protrusions and a gelatinous physique that's admittedly hard to put into words. However, the adaptation did do a wonderful job of putting an image to this name, even if the image was a chaotic, tangled-up, tentacled entity. But coming back to Lovecraft, his descriptions of Cthulhu's physique remain as vague and mysterious as Eldritch horror can be. In the third part of The Call of Cthulhu, The Madness from the Sea, the narrator stumbles upon an Australian journal from 1925 that describes a mysterious derelict found at sea. The report talks about the account of a man rescued from the sea who describes his strange experience as he made it out alive during a struggle that seemingly involved Cthulhu. In this way, the monster remained faceless and was only assumed to be scary due to the lived experiences and the terror spread by those who had lived to tell the tale, while our narrator does his best to dig deeper into the Cthulhu cult and its presence in old sea taverns. As Johansson, Rodriguez, and their crew decided to explore Cthulhu's alleged home, they went from landing at a mud bank to climbing up and down rock and weed to finally catch a glimpse of the creature. Unfortunately, of the 6 men who never reached the ship, Johansson believed 2 perished out of pure fright after witnessing this monster, and Cthulhu was declared indescribable. There was no language for such, quote, abysms of shrieking and immemorial lunacy, and the story describes Cthulhu as the thing of the idols and the green sticky spawn of the stars, whose mystical appearance could never be truly captured. Why does Cthulhu look like an octopus, a dragon, and a humanoid all at once? Well, many descriptions of Cthulhu refer to it as squid-headed. The entity's features extend far beyond this and can be described as an octopus, a dragon, and a humanoid all at the same time. To begin with, Lovecraft's idol descriptions and statuette-based designs were made evident in his short story, The Call of Cthulhu, wherein the first part follows the narrator's journey through Professor Angel's papers, including a manuscript about H.A. Wilcox and the Cthulhu cult. These papers were also accompanied by a bas-relief, which can be best described as a small clay relief depicting Cthulhu. This figure is described as a monster that could only be conceived out of a diseased fantasy, and while the narrator declares that they would not be unfaithful to the thing's spirit, they describe it as an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature. To add to this, They mention that the sculpture was a pulpy, tentacled head on a grotesque, scaly body with wings, and this description further bleeds into the story's next part, The Tale of Inspector Legrasse, wherein the titular character takes interest in a statuette inspired by Cthulhu. This figure had an anthropoid outline with an octopus head, a face full of feelers, and a rubbery body with claws and wings, and if these physical features weren't enough, the story also established that the sculpture had a lifelike evilness. All these descriptions point towards Cthulhu being far different from any Earth animal, even if he has characteristics that sound like a mix of reptiles, humanoids, and dragons. However, this could also be attributed to the human tendency to attach familiar visual categories to the unknown, which is also why the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society motion picture, The Call of Cthulhu, introduced the monster with familiar features like wings and humanoid features attached to its monstrous scaly figure with tentacles sprouting out of its head and sharp claws aiming for its victims. Are Cthulhu's facial tentacles actually tentacles, or something stranger? Now that we've established Cthulhu's basic form, let's dig into some of the finer details of its physiology. Starting off with his face, Lovecraft's descriptions paint his facial features to include a mass of feelers that protrude from the topmost part of his body and give off a similar appearance to an octopus or squid head. Now, he never provides the exact biology of these tentacles, and their functions, arrangement, and length remain up for discussion. If we were to look at more of his writings, The Call of Cthulhu's second part, The Tale of Legrasse, describes Cthulhu's statuette as having an anthropoid outline, an octopus-like head, and a mass of feelers. Moreover, his head leaned forward so that these tentacles, or feelers, brushed the backs of his forepaws, which clasped his raised knees. Along the same lines, the story's third part, Madness from the Sea, involves Johansson's description that goes along the lines of an awful squid head with writhing feelers, and that's really all we have to work with. While Lovecraft refrained from sharing an anatomical blueprint, Go Tanabe's 2024 comic brings this image to life with a non-human face with appendages dangling all around the creature's mouth, making it one of the closest representations we have. However, this neat circle of tentacles around an identifiable mouth is a modern twist on a character that comes from artistic interpretation more than Lovecraft's facts. At the end of the day, all we know is that Cthulhu has a pulpy tentacled head, and Lovecraft left it up to our imaginations to speculate whether these structures were sensory organs or feeding appendages, manipulators, or alien features that humans don't know how to describe. Cthulhu has wings, but can he actually fly with them? Many discussions around Cthulhu's physique notably point out his wings, which were a defining feature of the character's initial depictions. In the first part of The Call of Cthulhu, he's described as a pulpy, tentacled head with a scaly body and rudimentary wings. In the second part, Legrasse's detailed statuette highlighted this feature by talking about his long, narrow wings, whose tips touched the back edge of the statuette's block. Lovecraft even included these wings in his sketch in 1934, wherein he placed the wings on the creature's back where they protrude out of his upper back, and they're so long they reach the equivalent of the creature's feet. These wings seem to be slender but sharp, taking up little space on his back but appearing long enough to expand whenever he needs them. Such narrow wings also connect the Great Old Ones to their extraterrestrial origins, but it should be noted that the stories don't directly depict Cthulhu using these wings to fly or show him traveling through space. Later on, the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, or HPLHS adaptation, depicted Cthulhu with bat-like appendages instead of unstructured wings, thereby bringing a known form to an otherwise mysterious entity. However, the exact purpose of these wings remains unknown, and it's up to our own interpretations to guess whether they're functional flight organs, vestigial structures, aesthetic additions, or if they serve a whole other unimaginable purpose. How gigantic is Cthulhu really? Steering away from Cthulhu's features, I'm sure you're wondering just what this character's dimensions are, and if he towers over his victims or appears at eye level where he can ensnare them with his fearful demeanor. I know this isn't the answer you want to hear, but once more, Lovecraft doesn't give us an exact answer. To be fair, a huge theme in Eldritch horror is that the unknown is scarier because it leaves things to our imagination, but thankfully enough, Lovecraft's stories do give us enough hints to derive our own conclusions. For starters, the story involves Johansson describing Cthulhu as a mountainous monstrosity, which immediately places him at a gigantic height. In the story's third part, Cthulhu once again creates disastrous disturbances to the water while swimming, and eventually emerging beside the Alert with his head nearly reaching the yacht's bowsprit. Such descriptions establish that he is gigantic, but they don't support a reliable exact height, and to further support these theories, it should be noted that Go Tanabe's comic adaptation directly compared Cthulhu with human figures and architecture, hinting that he towers over all humans with ease. Is Cthulhu solid, rubbery, gelatinous, or capable of changing his physical state? Coming to Cthulhu's form, the HPLHS adaptation did bring him to life as a solid creature that hinted at his being a structured organism, but this directly contrasts with the character's original descriptions in Lovecraftian text. In the original story, the Cthulhu statuette depicts a scaly, rubbery-looking body rather than establishing a gelatinous or physically unstable exterior texture. Later in the same story, the living Cthulhu is also described as a gigantic, gelatinous entity that tries to squeeze through a doorway, likening it to a jelly-like structure. All these hints suggest that he might have a deformable body that could alter its mass distribution to squeeze through tiny openings and expand to intimidate his opponents, giving him a kind of physical plasticity. Now, this shouldn't be confused with shapeshifting, as the character never assumes alternate forms, but rather may only be capable of tweaking his mass to alter size and shape. How does Cthulhu rebuild himself after a ship tears straight through him? In the third part of Lovecraft's original story, there is a moment where Johansen directs their ship, the Alert, directly into Cthulhu to defend themselves from his incoming attack. In the process, Cthulhu's head and body take a catastrophic hit, and one might assume that ruptures of this scale would lead to his immediate collapse. However, he disperses into his gelatinous mass and almost immediately reassembles into his typical structure. Well, Lovecraft never gives us any explanation of whether he can regenerate with the help of cellular regeneration, molecular attraction, some control over the laws of physics, or even psychic control. We can assume that there is some form of reconstitution that makes Cthulhu capable of holding his rather unstructured form. Tanabe's comic adaptation also brings this visual to life, with Cthulhu's body being utterly destroyed, while somehow having the ability to recover its original shape, and as I retrace the story to its origins, Johansen had quite literally rammed their yacht into Cthulhu's head. Is Cthulhu actually dead, asleep, alive, or trapped between all three? Now that we've talked about Cthulhu's physiological features enough, let's move on to his spiritual state, as debates regarding his survival status continue to flood Lovecraftian horror fan chats. While the cult describes him as dead while he dreams beneath R'lyeh, there is enough evidence to establish he's mentally active enough to send his psychic impressions and dreams to humans, and eventually even wake up to attack humans before returning to his submerged prison. All of this leads to the question, is he dead, alive, asleep, or trapped in a state between all three? Well, the stories provide plenty of evidence that he remains in his senses even while dormant, making it easy to conclude that he's definitely not in a state of typical hibernation as seen in animal species. Instead, a deeper dive into the second part of Lovecraft's tale explains that Cthulhu would rise from his dark house in R'lyeh and eventually return while his cult waits to liberate him, while the third story confirms his physical state as the narrator talks about how Cthulhu lives on even after Johansen rammed his yacht into his head. Even the HPLHS adaptation's trailer suggests that R'lyeh was the resting place of something that could awaken at any time, further suggesting that Cthulhu is an entity who's above human concepts like life and death. While he might be biologically dead, dormant, or suspended, as per human understanding, the true nature of his alien existence remains unresolved in true cosmic horror fashion, even if later Lovecraftian works establish that he's a malevolent entity who remains trapped within R'lyeh and eventually is destined to return. How can Cthulhu invade people's dreams while his body is sealed beneath the ocean? Even while Great Cthulhu remains trapped in the ocean, he continues to haunt people in their dreams, seemingly telepathically, but it's a greater, more complex physiological mystery than that. In The Call of Cthulhu, the story unravels to reveal that Henry Wilcox has sculpted Cthulhu's figure after seeking inspiration from his delirious dreams of cyclopean cities, of titan blocks, and sky-flung monoliths. imagery that was also captured in Wilcox's dream in the HPLHS adaptation, with instances where the characters jerked awake after witnessing Cthulhu in their dreams amidst terrible disasters. The story brought the whole monster invading people's dreams while being sealed beneath the ocean trope to life. Even in the original story, Wilcox receives attention through his strange stories and odd dreams, and he called himself psychically hypersensitive as he told Professor Angel all about his dreams wherein he saw these cyclopean cities dripping with green ooze and latent horror. Even when Cthulhu awakens, Wilcox has an almost instantaneous realization, making this power similar to telepathy, but there's no text to confirm that. Instead, there are theories floating around that suggest that Cthulhu's consciousness might operate independently from ordinary sensory organs and might be active even when his physical form is dormant. These dreams were not reserved for Wilcox alone, and the narrator reveals many worldwide reports gathered by Professor Angel. These included accounts of artists and poets who, in the period between February 28th and April 2nd, had experienced bizarre dreams that were so intense that it sent them spiraling. Over a quarter of them even reported that they felt acute fear of the gigantic thing visible towards the end of their dreams, and one case was described in the notes as very sad. A well-known architect went violently insane and died several months later. The dates of these dreams, especially February 28th, coincide with the third part's adventure, wherein the earthquake-born storm had come. While Johansson's crew could sense these physical distortions, the artists and poets had begun dreaming of Cthulhu, an ominous foreshadowing of sorts. These dreams continued until the 2nd of April, with increasing intensity and vividness, and the dreamers were filled with a sense of dread so intense that one of them went mad and another lapsed into delirium. Such experiences only made Cthulhu's existence all the more horrific, as it was insane to think that one mystery monster in the depths of the oceans could not only evoke fear in his victims' eyes, but also show up in the dreams of many others to warn the world of its return. Does simply looking at Cthulhu drive a person insane? Now, coming to the crux of Cthulhu's capability to drive people insane, there are many accounts of individuals dying, losing their minds, or spiraling into delirium after perceiving Cthulhu in real life. In fact, this trope extends to many Lovecraftian monsters, as they are set within the cosmic horror universe, where man often comes face to face with entities never meant to be witnessed by human eyes. From this point of view, it adds up that Cthulhu's victims experience extreme psychological distress, and the original story's third part follows the 8 men who landed on R'lyeh as they watch him slobber into sight after squeezing his gelatinous body through a black doorway. Of the 6 men who never reached the ship, Johansson believed 2 perished out of pure fright in that instance, while Bryden reached the alert with Johansson and later looked back and lost his sanity. It was eventually reported that he died due to excitement or exposure, especially since there's no Lovecraft canon that establishes Cthulhu's eye contact causes madness. Instead, it's an amalgamation of overwhelming terror, the realization that they're in the presence of a cosmic entity, and psychic influence that messes with the victim's understanding of reality. Calling it an insanity gaze or eye contact of terror would be a disservice to the intricacies of Lovecraftian horror, but later adaptations have often exaggerated this ability to fit certain narratives. For instance, in the 14th season of South Park, there's an episode called Coon vs. Coon and Friends, which depicts Cthulhu as a rather conventional active monster who evokes fear, which is in direct contrast to the creature's vague, mysterious demeanor. Is Cthulhu really a sea creature, or is the ocean basically his prison? While many stories simply paint Cthulhu as a giant sea monster, this couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, he's only associated with the ocean because R'lyeh sank beneath the Pacific, and he's actually one of the great old ones who lived ages before men even existed. They had come to the young world out of the sky, and while they were gone under the earth and the sea, their dead bodies narrated their secrets to humanity through dreams. These men went on to form cults honoring and worshipping them in the hopes of their return, and Cthulhu was destined to be the great priest who would rise and bring the earth beneath his sway once again from his dark house in the city of R'lyeh. While this city was under the waters, the secret cult waited to liberate him, chanting, "In his house at R'lyeh, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming." Lovecraft's writings further revealed that the great old ones in R'lyeh were preserved by Cthulhu's spells, while the living world preserved their memories through strong cult presence. In this way, the idea behind Cthulhu being a sea monster is almost outrageous, as he was a far more mythical being than just a regular predator in the deep sea. When the time came, he did rise from his dark base and showed up in all his glory to chase the Alert, marking his resurgence just like the cultists had hoped for. Now, while Cthulhu is admittedly good at navigating the ocean and has even managed to pursue the Alert with precise strokes, his predatory abilities do not immediately make him a sea monster by any means. Instead, he's a cosmic being trapped underwater, and this was also hinted at in William Eubanks' film, Underwater, which made use of the ocean's crushing depth and darkness to add another layer of terror. He further confirmed that the film's giant entity was supposed to be a modern interpretation of Cthulhu, and while the film fits into Lovecraftian themes of using the unknown to evoke fear, the film is only inspired by the real monster and not a true adaptation of the tale. Where did a body like Cthulhu's come from, and is he even part of a recognizable species? While we've established Cthulhu as one of the great old ones, it should be noted that this theory comes from the cult's accounts as explained in the original story's second part. As old Castro explained the hideous legends of the cult, there were things that ruled the world and had great cities, and their remains could now be found as Cyclopean stones on Pacific islands. As they had passed away ages before humanity first came into existence, there were arts that could revive them when the stars had aligned in the cycle of eternity. While chosen humans at the dawn of time had visions of the entombed old ones, eventually the sinking of the stone city of Rillier, with all its monuments and sepulchres, brought any hopes of their return to an all-time low. After Rillier sank beneath the waves and the deep waters, it was assumed that the city would emerge again when the stars were right, meaning that Cthulhu's return relied on Rillier rising back up. Such theories do ground Cthulhu's presence among the great old ones, and while they were not a structured species as such, we do know of claims that they came from the stars. Since Lovecraft himself refrains from commenting on his evolutionary tree, the home planet of the species, or their developmental biology, we don't know whether any mutation experiments or surgical alterations were involved. In fact, it seems as though his anatomy is intrinsic to what he is, even if there are later works by different authors who have taken it upon themselves to craft elaborate classifications. Go Tanabe's comic also sticks to Lovecraft's story with its depiction of the cult's history and Rillier, and while it remains accurate in interpreting the gap between human civilization and the entity they worshipped, all anatomical choices are his own interpretation and not part of Lovecraftian canon. However, Lovecraft himself has linked Cthulhu to greater mythos in his short story, The Dunwich Horror, wherein the Necronomicon's texts reveal that Cthulhu was described as a cousin of the Old Ones associated with Yog-Sothoth, who patiently waited for a day when they would reign again. What did Lovecraft himself think Cthulhu actually looked like? While we often talk about interpretations of Cthulhu, Lovecraft himself had sketched out what this creature looked like for his friend Robert H. Barlow. This sketch was a design of the statuette that shows up in The Call of Cthulhu and was dated the 11th of May, 1934, about 6 years after the story was first published. In this figure, Cthulhu appears to face backward as a ball of mass with a blobby head, with doodles all over his body to capture his gelatinous nature and lack of form. It's a simple design with an anatomical outline and two sharp wings protruding out of Cthulhu's back and extending all the way to the base of the statuette. While this did help settle debates surrounding his head, body, limbs, and wings, it didn't establish anything regarding his anatomical features, musculature, or head tentacles, all of which were eventually interpreted as monstrous features in many later adaptations. Which famous Cthulhu powers are actually canon, and which ones were added later? Now that I've taken you through Cthulhu's powers, I'm sure you'll be able to discern between his actual canonical powers and decades worth of accumulated lore. The original story directly confirms Cthulhu's gigantic size, bodily plasticity, regenerative capabilities, physical strength, and dream influence, in addition to placing him as an almost immortal being with an extraterrestrial origin, leaving him in a place between death and dormancy. While there are no exact specifications for strength, weakness, combat stats, and so on, many writers have taken it upon themselves to add these features to the lore. However, it is important to distinguish between the two, as the original story only goes so far as to establish Cthulhu as a malevolent being hibernating within Rillier and subconsciously influencing humans through dreams. While the story suggests that he may eventually return, Lovecraft later went on to reference him in other works, and his 1931 novella, At the Mountains of Madness, also introduced Cthulhu's spawn. Eventually, August Derleth added to the Cthulhu mythos and classified him as one of the water elementals, placing him in an age-old rivalry with his half-brother, Hastur the Unspeakable. This additional piece of lore even inspired many short stories, even if there is criticism regarding him reshaping Lovecraft's amoral continuity by introducing concepts such as good and evil. Later on, John Glasby would take a shot at writing Cthulhu in his story, A Shadow from the Aeons, where the character roams around the riverbanks of Dominic Waldron's castle and roars out loud, but again, this is later added lore. Over the years, there have been many such instances of Cthulhu showing up in pop culture, such as TSR's gaming material, which had a whole chapter on his mythos and character stats in their 1980 book, Deities and Demigods. Eventually, Cthulhu's popularity resulted in him appearing in parody characters in real-world political rallies and elections, and in scientific discoveries, including a dark region on Pluto's equator. It was informally named Cthulhu Regio, and then Cthulhu Macula before receiving the official name Belton Regio. As previously mentioned, he also pops up in South Park, where this godlike monster flies around and seems to be an average neighborhood supervillain. Obviously, this adaptation has entirely reinterpreted the character and should not be directly compared to the eldritch horror entity in the Lovecraft canon. And with that, we've explored the key features of Cthulhu's eldritch anatomy, which become all the more frightening when we think about how his anatomy is never entirely understandable. While we know he has mass, claws, wings, facial tentacles, and limbs, Lovecraftian horror is defined by its determination to never truly explain the intricacies or reasons behind the creature's actions. All of this is intentional and directly contributes to how well he can evoke fear. Well, today we've taken you through some of his characteristic capabilities and anatomy. I can safely conclude that he has a collection of random supernatural powers, and it would be a disservice to go beyond that and break down the mechanisms that were intentionally left uncertain. But that's just my thoughts. We'd love to hear what you think in the comments section down below.